old man is sitting in his living room. And one of his little grandkids comes up running out and says, "Grandpa, can you make the sound of a frog?" He said, "No, I won't. I'm watching my TV show." And the kid runs back into the kitchen. Next grandchild runs out and says, "Hey, Grandpa, can you make the sound of a frog?" And he goes, What's this all about?" And he runs back into the kitchen. Third grandchild runs out and says, "Grandpa, is there any way you can make the sound of a frog?" And he goes, "What is going on in there?" And she says, "Well, Mom just said that we can go to Disneyland the second after you croak." Tonight's talk is on equanimity. Obviously, those kids didn't have much. They had an agenda. What I'd like to talk about tonight is what exactly is equanimity, which is considered the flower of meditation practice. How do you fire it up if you don't have it? What are the precautions to the practice? And what does equanimity have to do with living your life as fully as you can? Equanimity is considered a wonderful state of non-judging presence and spaciousness. The Buddha described it as abundant, exultant, immeasurable, without hostility or ill will. So it sounds pretty good. And of course, as we move through life, we are just hit all the time with all kinds of factors that pull us away from that spacious, allowing presence. When I was in the Peace Corps in Niger, someone explained to me that it was actually cheaper to get clothes made by a tailor than to buy them. I thought, wow, perfect, given this freaky body of mine. How great it would be to get some clothes made. So I met a tailor, wonderful, wonderful guy, and he took my measurements. He said, this will be great. He said, just come back tomorrow. I thought, wow, that's great. And so I came back the next day, and he welcomed me once again. We, shook hands, and I said, so how are things with my clothes? He goes, oh, come back tomorrow. I did that day after day. And I realized I was starting to get really impatient until I realized there's a kind of a different concept of time in that particular culture where I was. In fact, I found as I was going through my training in the local languages that there were actually no tenses in that language. You really couldn't say the day after tomorrow. It just didn't exist. And so all there really was now, today. And I found out that if you wanted to say now, you would say today. Today is now. But tomorrow is actually an extended time from today. It was a great lesson in cultivating equanimity, of seeing my impatience and my anticipation and my frustration. And of course, this is what we encounter in daily life. Things don't necessarily go your way. And how do you cultivate that sense of spaciousness? So just a little 2-minute Zen pop quiz, if you will. You can close your eyes. I'd like to read just a very short description. This is kind of a classical description of equanimity. I thought it might be nice just to sort of try it on internally. It's really just one sentence. If your mind becomes firm like a rock and no longer shakes in a world where everything is shaking, your mind will become your greatest friend, and suffering will not come your way. And you might take a moment just to sense this. Can you feel something inside that doesn't shake in a world where everything shakes? And part of the inquiry as to how to cultivate this is to stay connected to things exactly as they are. Can you stay connected to things exactly as they are? And then if you like, you can deepen your breath, and you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed if you prefer. So this term equanimity in Pali is referred to as upekkha. And there are kind of two elements in this word, and the way they fit together gives a little bit of insight into this. One translation is it's to look over. It's sort of the power of observation, to see with understanding, but also to kind of see with patience at the same time. One of the classic descriptions is it's like a grandmother with her grandchildren. And she loves her grandchildren, but she's a little bit less likely to get caught up in their drama because she's kind of seen it before. So there's kind of a looking over, but with a quality of wisdom. But it also means to stand in the middle. That is to say, to be balanced and to be centered. So it's this quality of seeing with a quality of wisdom and also with a quality of balance. So this is a counterpoint. This state is a counterpoint to what are called the 8 worldly winds. So when you're living a worldly life, there are these 8 winds that are battering you all the time. And they have to do with what you're running toward and what you're running away from. You're running toward seeking praise. You're seeking success. You're looking for pleasure. And you're looking for fame. And then the opposites, what you're running away from, which is trying to avoid blame, trying to avoid failure, trying to avoid pain, and trying to avoid disrepute or shame. Success and pleasure and fame are great, they're wonderful, but without wisdom they lead to arrogance. And identifying with failure and shame and pain can lock you into a really limited perspective in life. And so cultivating that steadiness where you're not bowled over by those winds is where your life comes more fully alive. As I've shared before, I've met a lot of incredibly successful people, materially successful people, who are deeply driven by an abject fear of failure. So the question then is, how do you cultivate this sense of equanimity? And one very practical element is through training your mind. And one of the ways you can train your mind is through developing your capacity for concentration. The teacher U Pandita says that this quality of equanimity or steadiness, it comes from being aware moment to moment without a break. When you're moment to moment present to what's real, there's no opportunity for the fear and the anxiety to come in. Now, of course, when you're practicing meditation, you no doubt have had moments of feeling that sense of really deep peace, where you sort of get concentrated, you get in a flow state, and no doubt you have had moments where you've completely lost it, and that's kind of what our practice is. You have an anchor, you gather your attention, you relax and concentrate, you get more and more present, and then suddenly you're hallucinating about what a horrible day is going to be tomorrow, and then you notice and you bring yourself back. So developing your mindfulness practice, your meditation practice, is a very, very powerful tool. And what happens is you wake up more quickly when you're caught in one of those 8 worldly winds. And over time, with patience and persistence, there can be more and more of a sense of really abiding in the here and now. So developing the mind is really important. And there are a number of qualities, the 7 faculties of mind that you can focus on developing, which I've talked about before. The other aspect, in addition to just training your mind in a formal way, is letting life be your teacher. Really paying attention to the nature of life and to the nature of reality. And this can be a profound, profound teaching. One of the most poignant stories, a classic story, which you may have heard before, is in the Buddha's time, a woman who lost her young child and had just immeasurable grief. And she went to the Buddha and she said, you're this master teacher that everyone's following. You must have these amazing powers. Bring my son back to life. And of course, he said no, he couldn't do that. But she was very insistent and kept insisting. And he said, I'll make you a deal. He said, if you can find a household where death has not come, and bring back a mustard seed from that house, I will bring your child back to life. And with great passion and love for her lost child, she went off on her quest. And as you can imagine, she went to household after household after household, and not only saw that death comes to every household, but also came in contact with the deep, abiding grief that everyone shares. And when she came back with a profound sense of equanimity, with the deep wisdom of seeing clearly into the nature of reality, but also a heart that was awakened to that suffering. The Serenity Prayer really says it all. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's all right there. Chances are, if you've been meditating for a while, you've noticed some beneficial effect. And as I have joked in the past, if you meditate, you feel better. You feel your depression better, you feel your anger better, you feel your shame better. That's part of it. That's definitely part of it. But at the same time, as you feel all of that better, you also feel your joy better. You feel your compassion better. You feel a sense of possibility better. And the more you pay attention, the more you strengthen that sense of the witness, the seat of the witness, the capacity to be resilient and really keep your attention on what is true. And there's a maturing that occurs in practice. And no doubt you've experienced this, where you stay with the practice and you ride through some challenging waves, and there's always insight on the other side of that wave. So firing up equanimity can come through training your mind and staying with it. It comes with life. I think part of it just simply comes with age, the wisdom that comes with age. And we begin to really sense how much our life is run by our relationship to change. And that becomes one of the biggest takeaways, of course. You begin to see into those three characteristics of reality. You see more and more clearly into the nature of impermanence, or anicca. That everything born of causes and conditions is subject to change. And just remembering that lens, this too will pass. But then you also get to see very, very intimately your relationship to what's changing, which leads to the stress and dissatisfaction and suffering. That anything you resist is going to result in rope burn. Anything you can allow to change will invoke a sense of ease. And then you begin to see into the nature of self as well, that much of who you are is deeply conditioned, and yet there's something in who you are that is unconditioned. When you were 6 years old, looking in the mirror, and looking in the mirror now, has the one looking in the mirror really changed? So we develop a little more wisdom over time. And then the question becomes, as you're developing these capacities, how do you work it? And there's some very practical ways that you can engage in life as an exercise in cultivating equanimity. I've talked about one of my personal practices at some length in the past. When I moved down here to DC, developed a completely fresh perspective on training my heart and mind. It's daily, it's alive, provides never-ending opportunity, which I call driving as a spiritual practice. I worked on this one a lot. When I first moved down here, I just simply lived in constant outrage every time I got behind the wheel. And then I started to see, with the help of my spousal unit sitting next to me, just how reactive I was to life in a car. And I actually decided to take on driving as a spiritual practice. Failing miserably time and time again, but it really has changed my relationship to driving. Can I actually drive with equanimity? Can I actually be a well-wisher of all as I'm making my way down the highway? And I get some wonderful growth opportunities along the way. But that's what happens in life. And someone once said, this is one of the best definitions of meditation. Meditation is one insult after another. And have you noticed that in your practice? You think you're sort of steady, and then suddenly you realize with horror where your mind has gone. The little rat hole your mind has just gone down. And it's the same in life. There's a certain steadiness, a certain equilibrium, and then one of those winds just comes and knocks you over. And a really wonderful way to practice, it's a question that comes up from time to time when people will ask, if I'm meditating and I have an itch, is it legal to scratch it? And it's actually a phenomenal opportunity to explore if you have a little bit of patience. Some traditions will say absolutely not. There are some traditions where you do what's called a sitting of strong determination. Like you do not move. Just be the witness of what's arising. But it's a fascinating thing. And just as a little practice tip, that let's say your nose is itching and you feel the unpleasant sensation begin to arise. And as you watch it, you watch the mind. At some point your mind will say, if I don't scratch that itch, I'm going to start screaming out loud, running out of the room. But what you can do is watch the sensation build and then make a conscious decision to scratch the itch. So you actually, you watch it, you make the decision, and then you feel your hand moving through space. And then you scratch the itch. And then you'll watch, again, this is you're watching the level of what's called Vedana. And Vedana is the feeling tone. And Vedana has three characteristics: unpleasant feeling tone, pleasant feeling tone, and neutral feeling tone. So you'll scratch the itch, and then you'll watch the unpleasant morph into pleasant, and then maybe move into neutral, and bring your hand down, and then something unpleasant will arise, giving you more opportunity to explore equanimity. But it's a fascinating thing to slow down and observe your reaction to anything that's happening. And as we often say in meditation practice or mindfulness practice, it's not just what's happening, it's your relationship to it. Can you notice your reaction? Is there aversion? Is there pushing away? Is there reaching? Is there grasping? Is there boredom? Notice that. It can be valuable information. So there are some precautions to be aware of. This is the fourth of what are called the Brahma Viharas we've been talking about. These are the immeasurable states of the heart, or the immeasurable intentions. And each of them has what are called near enemies. So the first one we explored, loving kindness, like cultivating that sense of metta or friendliness, it can very easily, unselfish love can very easily turn into selfish love. Just that little bit of attachment that can just kind of creep in when you're practicing friendliness. Either the attachment to the result you're going to get from offering friendliness, or you just really like something and you want more of it. So just to be aware that the practice of loving kindness can lead to a little bit of clinging. Sending a little bit of our next one, compassion, to our motorcycle driver out there. Compassion, the capacity to feel what another feels. So when you feel compassion for someone who's suffering, it's a really beautiful thing, but the near enemy is pity. Very slight distinction between feeling compassion for someone and feeling pity. Feeling pity is separation. You're separating yourself. Compassion is being with feeling. Our fourth category of sympathetic joy or unselfish joy, that can have a near enemy of kind of what's called sort of like blind euphoria. And there's just sort of like a sense of being really joyous but ungrounded at the same time. It can also have a quality of jealousy. That when you're wishing someone else well, it can easily glide into, well, I'm wishing you well, but boy, I really wish what you had. You can kind of sense that slide into another state. And equanimity, which is this capacity to hold spacious presence, can very easily look like indifference. It can easily look like a little bit of disassociation, where you're actually removing the heart from what you're seeing. So it requires some special attention. In this practice, we talk about non-judging awareness. Sometimes we use the word the witness. And when you're the witness to your experience, that witness can sometimes be very cold. And that cold witness can look like indifference. That's not equanimity. Equanimity is the sort of the wise, compassionate seeing. So when we practice this very subtle state of really being spacious, there can be a sense of, again, that sense of indifference. It can sometimes lead to like a wanting to withdraw, to kind of disengage from the world. And there are certain philosophies, and the spiritual community where I lived for many years, it was very informed by something called Samkhya philosophy, which basically says the world is full of illusion. Don't go there. Just don't go there. Don't engage. You know, if you don't have a car, you'll never have car problems. You know, if you're not in a relationship, you'll never have relationship problems. It's not exactly the same. It can also cultivate a sense of stoicism or kind of a sort of a macho attitude of like, well, if there's something that's unpleasant, I'm going to force myself to feel it because that's what equanimity is. That's not equanimity. So we need to be vigilant in this practice. It's such a simple state, and yet it can get so complicated so easily, like many things in life. When you're cultivating that sense of spacious equanimity, as was pointed out to me, Sylvia Boorstein describes it as the inclination toward wisdom and love. And when you're holding that spacious presence, the mind will move toward seeing what is true and a heart that can hold it. So the seeing what is true, such an integral part of the practice. I've been meeting with a couple. I'm going to be officiating their wedding in a couple weeks, and they're both really deep into these practices. They've both done multiple intensive retreats, and they were saying how they would like for me to talk about the Dharma, about these teachings. They kind of wanted to really take some time to really talk about clear seeing. And I just imagined myself saying something like to the congregation, Lou and Rachel would like me to remind you now that you're going to die. Everyone you know is going to die in no particular order. And everything you love in this world is going to vanish. And in a few generations, no one's going to remember your name. So on that note, let's get on with the wedding. But that is an important part of the practice, is recognizing what is true. And just as mindfulness is made up of these two wings, this capacity to see what is true and the capacity to cultivate a heart that can hold that, those are the elements that cultivate equanimity as well. So why don't we again do a short little reflection. So one element of equanimity is recognizing what is true and sustaining a moment-to-moment awareness of what is already here. So you might take a moment to select an anchor, a breath or sound or feeling. And just sense what it's like to engage into this mind training of paying attention on purpose, sustaining attention on a focal point. And you might just sense over the next few minutes what it's like to look through the lens of these three characteristics of reality. The first is sensitizing yourself to everything that is changing. And the second characteristic is sensitizing yourself to your relationship to what is changing. Noting that anything you resist will create some kind of heat or burn or resistance. Anything you can let be will open a greater sense of ease. The third characteristic points toward who you are as the one who is aware. A quality of spacious, unconditioned awareness. Your capacity to see clearly. And sensing as well, is it possible to call on some form of loving presence? A quality of kindness or compassion. A heart that can hold this changing moment. Gently deepening your breath. In your own time, letting your eyes open. It's another classic story. A farmer got so old that he couldn't work the fields anymore. So he'd spend the day just sitting on the porch. His son, still working the farm, would look up from time to time and see his father sitting there. He's of no use anymore, the son thought to himself. He doesn't do anything. One day the son got so frustrated by this that he built a wooden coffin, dragged it over to the porch, and told his father to get in. Without saying anything, the father climbed inside. After closing the lid, the son dragged the coffin to the edge of the farm where there was a high cliff. As he approached the drop, he heard a light tapping on the lid from the inside of the coffin. He opened it up. Still lying there peacefully, the farmer looked up at his son. "I know you're going to throw me over the cliff, but before you do, may I suggest something?" "What is it?" replied the son. "Throw me over the cliff if you like," said the father, "but save this good wooden coffin. Your children might need to use it." There's this wonderful poet that said, from time to time, it's helpful to take the 3,000-year view. And I love that line. It just sort of pops into my mind every now and then. That when I just imagine the 3,000-year view, the tightness and the pettiness and the fear and the anxiety has a lot more space. And it really helps to open up the frame of this amazing life that we're living. This practice is very much around wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality. And it requires a sense of rigor. It requires a sense of patience. It requires that you relax again and again. It requires that you call on a quality of heart to stay present. It requires that you pay attention. It requires that you find others who want what you want, which makes the path so much more enjoyable. So remembering that wonderful phrase as well from, I think, Basho, it's appropriate for this time of year. This little koan that says, "Spring comes and the grass grows by itself." That when we can take that big step back, it changes the frame of how our life opens up in front of us. Let's close with a very short little meditation and a short reading I'd like to share with you. And these are some phrases from some of the original texts. As a solid mass of rock is not stirred by the wind, so a sage is not moved by praise and blame. As a deep lake is clear and undisturbed, so a sage becomes clear upon hearing the Dharma. In these final minutes, you might just take a moment just to sense this fruit of practice. The mind vibrant, alert, and seeing clearly. And a heart that can hold the mystery of your life. And in these final minutes, if there is someone in your life that may be struggling, you might take a moment to wish them well. I wish them ease. I wish them safety and freedom. As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for your time and attention. And I know as we're cultivating equanimity and not indifference, I'm happy to say we do have cookies. So Please enjoy a cookie on your way out the door. See you next week. Thank you.